This is for Cameron. Cam.
What is up, Mountaineer and college football fans? We've got an exciting show for you this afternoon. I'm going to be talking to the concussion doctor. You may have known him from the Tua video that's recently blown up. Dr. Cameron Marshall, founder of Complete Concussions, is going to be talking with us today. You may know him from the Tua Tagovailoa video that has blown up recently on YouTube. And we're excited to talk to him about C.J. Donaldson. How we doing, Doc?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on. So October 1st, West Virginia is playing Texas. C.J. Donaldson takes a run. He goes up the middle. He has an awkward spill. The next thing we know, a stretcher's coming out onto the field. We find out after the game, they labeled a concussion, a surprise to a lot of us fans. From your vantage point, once you saw the video, what was your take on it?
Well, I mean, he came in. It didn't look like that much force, really. A lot of these things are kind of hard, and they're kind of deceiving because you look at it from a camera, a vantage point that's pretty far away. You're looking at it from multiple angles, but it didn't look like that hard of a hit necessarily. But the way that he got hit was on the side of the head, which could induce some rotational issues, and oftentimes rotation tends to be more of an issue for players than just straight on linear hits. And so that could have had an impact on things. But the thing that concerned me, and I think what probably concerned the therapy team, is when they actually, he apparently reported some issues with numbness and some kind of sensory issues. And to me, the way he got hit, I was concerned right away of more of a neck issue. And most importantly, spinal cord, which is likely why they brought out the stretcher and kind of ushered him off in that way to begin with. Was probably the big concern with any time that you get a head injury. If you get enough force to cause a concussion, you can also do some damage to the spinal cord and neck. And so if he reported, kind of some numbness issues, that was my initial take, was like, it looks like maybe there's some spinal cord involvement. And then when you bring out the stretcher, that, okay, that's their concern too, right? You don't need a stretcher for a concussion injury. It's kind of the coincidental piece of that. Yeah.
Really interesting. And so it's kind of been very little noise coming out of Morgantown on CJ over the last couple of weeks. West Virginia fortunately had a bye week after that game. And as we prepare for Baylor this week, head coach Neil Brown does a press conference in which he finally addresses the situation. They do label it as a concussion. And then doing some extra research, I was able to find these 5 phases, and you say 6 phases technically that these patients go through. Can you touch on these phases and tell us what the doctors are looking for in each phase? And possibly what a relapse or something along those lines would look like for a patient in each phase, if you can do that.
Yeah, sure. So this is what's known as the graduated return to play protocol. And it's a phased approach, and we gradually increase the intensity of activities to try and see if anything triggers an increase in your symptoms. And so you kind of start off with phase 1, which is a bit of like a rest phase. Let's take it easy for at least 24 hours. Then after that, let's start doing some light kind of cognitive, light physical based activity to see if that provokes anything. If that doesn't increase your symptoms at all, then the following day, then you can move on to a slightly increased activity to see if that does anything. Then you can move on to what's called non-contact practice. This is usually when it's like, okay, you're dressing, you're running routes, but you're not engaging in any type of contact at all, but you're doing more sport specific type skills. Then if that's okay, then it's full contact practice. So now we can actually start engaging in some friendly contact, right, with your own teammates. And then the following stage, if you're okay with that and no increase in symptoms, then you can generally return to full gameplay. And that's the final kind of stage 6. So we gradually move athletes through this process. You're supposed to have at least 24 hours between each stage. And for those that saw the video I did on Tua, this is a symptom-based approach, and that's really the problem that's going on in concussion right now, is that we rely on athletes to tell us their symptoms at each of these stages. There's motivation from the athlete to potentially say, no, I'm feeling good at each stage because they want to get back too. But what we know is that the brain actually takes much longer than 6 days to recover. Now, they've done this as 6 stages, and you have to have at least 24 hours between each stage. But the shortest period of time you could do is 6 days, which works out really well in something like college or NFL football, because guess what? We play, every 7 days. So a 6-day protocol works out really, really well if you're, the football organization, that's trying to get that athlete back, or if you're the athlete that's highly motivated to come back to that game. So the 6 stages are generally that process. Each stage could take 5 or 6 days, or it could take, but it has to take at least 24 hours. And so that's kind of the graduated process that he'd be going through right now.
Interesting. And so what would take somebody, let's say somebody's moving along at a good pace and you're moving this along every 24 hours. What would be some concerns that a doctor would have that would hold this up 5 or 6 days in between stages?
Just an increase in symptoms generally. So if I say, so our protocol typically is, we're putting you on the treadmill as your light physical activity, or we're putting you on a bike. And if I start ramping up your heart rate, and when I get you to 150 beats a minute, you're like, oh, I'm feeling dizzy, I have a headache. Okay, you're not there yet. And so now the next day I bring you back in and we try that again. And we kind of keep trying that periodically until you're able to get to that full exertion level with no increase. Okay, good. Now you've done that part. Now let's get you running routes and doing all sorts of different things where you're moving and rotating and doing all that stuff. Oh, that makes you symptomatic because, all that rotation is creating, some visual issues for you. Okay, you're not there yet. And so we pull back. And so it's very athlete directed in a way where you're looking to see what triggers these symptoms, and you do it in a very kind of methodical stepwise process. And so if they're getting symptom triggers at any one of these stages, they'll hold them at that stage until they're able to pass it. And then when they pass it, they can move on to the next stage. But again, you're relying on an athlete to tell you the truth, right? And so if they're kind of hiding stuff, that's where you can run into trouble. Or if you have a medical staff that's highly motivated as well, they may, not push you to that full exertion. They may stop short in order to let you pass that stage. So there's all sorts of things that could potentially go wrong with a scenario like this. And then I think at the back end, the really kind of big component is usually being able to pass all of your kind of baseline metrics, whether it's neurocognitive testing, reaction time testing, functional testing. The players will all go through this at the start of the season to try and establish what's called a baseline. So I'm not sure what the protocol is for the NCAA necessarily, but every team usually has their own kind of protocol that they'll do, whether it's, some elements of something called a SCAT-5. Some of them will do something called a King-Devick test, or they might do some reaction time testing, and then also some neurocognitive testing. So memory, concentration, all these things usually done on a computer basis, but we're looking for brain function. So even if the symptoms go away, sometimes they may get hung up at that last stage where they're unable to pass some of their baseline. Their balance may still be impaired, or they may still be showing reaction time deficits. Those are the issues that may hold somebody back kind of closer to the back end. Yeah.
Is there a stage that somebody is more than likely going to get hung up in than others, or is it just all over the board?
Luck of the draw. Everyone's different. Some people get hung up on the initiation of exercise. Some people get hung up on rotation. It depends on what the issues are. Some people, if they have an issue with their vestibular function, which is kind of the little sensors in your ears that tell you kind of where you are in space and how much motion there is, that person may be fine with linear exercise. We get them on a bike or a treadmill, they're fine. But when we put them in the sport specific environment where they have to run downfield and turn, everything starts to spin for them. So that player may get hung up at that stage, versus the other player may get hung up at the initiation of exercise or getting their heart rate to that extreme level, or everyone's really different. So you kind of have to take it through that process.
Awesome. So looking at this I want to talk to you about CTE just for a second. And so your video with Tua was so informative for me. It really caused me to jump in and research and stuff about this sport that we all love, but at whose expense? Because we love these kids too, these players. And so when I think about some of these guys and what they've gone on to do in their lives, I just wonder how many have been prevented from doing that as well. And you made some really good points about how concussions can stack on top of one another, and how they're used on a 100 scale, a percentage-based energy Can you educate some of our viewers about that?
So the energy that I'm talking about is actually the energy that's produced by the cells in your body. So when you eat food and you breathe in oxygen, there's chemical processes that happen inside the cells of your body, including your brain cells, where it goes into a little piece called the mitochondria, and that's what produces a compound called ATP. And ATP is the energy molecule that's used by your body. So all the cells in your body, your muscles, your brain, your nervous system, everything uses ATP, and it's produced by the mitochondria in your cell. After a concussion injury, the mitochondria becomes dysfunctional because of some chemical processes that happen. But because the mitochondria becomes dysfunctional, we're unable to produce energy. So what you get is, after the injury, you get this initial electrical storm that causes the first initial symptoms. That tends to subside, but over the next few days is when that energy stores start to drop, because our brain is not producing the amount of energy that's needed. And so if that energy comes back up to normal, the research shows that if you get another concussion, once the energy stores have fully reset, which takes a few weeks in humans, but if you get a second concussion, the evidence shows that you just go through the same process again. So it's just another concussion. Whereas if you get a concussion when your energy levels are already low, like you already have some dysfunction there, meaning that you're not fully recovered, there's ongoing brain injury, you get another concussion there, well, then you drop even further because your starting point is low. And then that's when they become cumulative. So there's this idea that you typically hear in like the media that says, well, concussions are cumulative. And that's not necessarily the case, because what we see is that a single concussion that's allowed to fully recover is actually just a single concussion. And another one that happens is just another concussion. We don't create that same cumulative, because if you picture this, your energy stores drop, they come back up, then they get hit again. Well, they just drop again because your starting point is still back at 100%. Whereas if you get a concussion and then you get another concussion down here, well, then your starting point is here. So you drop even further. And your brain can sustain a drop in that energy by about, 20, 30, 40%. That's okay. But it's when it gets down below that kind of 60% kind of level is when you start actually, the cells can't survive. So you start creating permanent damage. And that's the issue with cumulative concussions. So the study that I talked about in that video is we always do this on mice, because we can't just tell a human to show up on Tuesday and we're going to give you a concussion and then come back next week and we'll give you another one. But with
too
mice,
bad.
Yeah, with mice, we can do that. And what we see in the animal studies is that if you give an animal 2 concussions back to back, they can actually die from that. And there's been cases of this in humans where, obviously not from a research perspective, but you get an athlete that gets a concussion and then they play again 3, 4, 5 days later, they get another concussion. And there's been actual events of fatality because of that, because the brain energy gets so low, you get this massive swelling in the brain, and the person can actually die from that. So it's a very serious thing if you have back-to-back concussions. So the big kind of issue here is the concussion recovery. So that's in the initial phases. But if you look at something like a CTE, there's evidence to show that it's that cumulative nature where people are not recovering fully, getting another concussion, another concussion, another concussion, another concussion. That's what creates some of these long-term issues. And it also is what creates kind of some of this permanent stuff that starts to happen over the long run. There's a really, really great study that's been done on this, again, in animals. But if you picture this study, there's a group that got no concussions. Then you had a group, and then the other 3 groups each got 5 concussions. But the only difference was how spaced out they were. So group 1 got a concussion every day for 5 days. Group 2 got a concussion every week for 5 weeks. And group 3 got a concussion every month for 5 months. And then they checked in with them a month later. Well, so a month after the final injury, the group that got a concussion every day for 5 days was still impaired. But the group that got a concussion every month for 5 months showed no difference than a group that never had a concussion. Right. Wow. So it's not necessarily the number of concussions you get, but it's how close together they were. And when they checked in on these animals 1 year later, the group that had a concussion every day for 5 days was still impaired. And the group that had a concussion every month was, again, no different than a group that had never had a concussion. So the big question here that I kind of posed in that video is, do we have a concussion problem? Or do we have a concussion management problem? We spend all this time, and the NFL in particular We spend all this time trying to say, how can we prevent concussions? Well, you're never going to prevent concussions. They're going to happen when you put athletes on a field chasing the same ball and hitting each other. It's going to happen. So that's not really the goal. But when it happens, how can we ensure that we take better care of athletes so that by the time they go back to play, their brain has recovered? And I think that, based on what the coach has said, he said 4 to 6 weeks, correct?
Right. So we've been told.
Right. So in my mind, that's fantastic because that is enough time to allow this to recover. And so whether they're taking this, more seriously based on, the potential prospect of this athlete, the fact that he's a freshman, the fact that he has so much potential, the fact that he's, a star of the team. And I think that taking that amount of time is so good for this player's longevity and being able to perform and take their life seriously, because there's a whole bunch that comes after this that I think that needs to be considered. And so I think that's a really good thing.
That leads me to say two other things. So the Neil Brown regime, although you're an outsider, I'm bringing you in to talk about us. Don't know we didn't really talk about how closely you followed the situation, but the Neil Brown, our head coach's regime at this point, is not at the best point. A lot of people want him fired. And I just have to say that for me personally, when he's under a lot of pressure right now, the C.J. Donaldson loss is it's a top 3 loss on the team outside of the quarterback and possibly the left tackle. That's probably the biggest loss we could have on the team. So for him and I don't want to make too big of a deal about this, but a lot of coaches would feel pressured to get that kid back sooner based off of that, because he's under fire. Let me just say, today's game or this evening's game is going to probably say a lot about his future with us. At least a lot of people will think so. That's number one. Number two is, so I like the question that you posed there when you talk about, do we have a concussion problem, or is it the treatment of concussions is a problem? Because my deal is, so you've seen the strike zone is as small as it's ever been for a player. You can't hit above the neck or the shoulders, and it's like, so kids get knees are getting blown out because they don't know where to hit. If what you're saying is true, would the helmet-to-helmet hits really matter anyway if they knew how to treat them? Do you know where I'm going with this? Because they've erased the strike zone for people to hit. And it's almost like, as a result, it's almost more dangerous now.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say. I think that, we do what we can to try and prevent injury. And I don't want to necessarily take away from the idea of trying to prevent, because if you can prevent, then the management side doesn't really matter. But I think that, like, for example, in the NFL, when they got rid of, head contact, and we've looked at the data since the no head contact rules have been imposed, and it shows very little to any difference in the terms of concussion rate. Now, that could be the result that at the same time that rule was imposed, people started paying more attention to concussions. So maybe there's the same amount of concussions, maybe there's less, but the fact that they're reported more shows that it's just a statistical anomaly. But so far, from what we can look at on the outside, is that, the head-to-head contact rule hasn't really reduced the number of concussions at all. Like, they're still going to happen. They're going to come with, hitting your head on the turf. They're going to come if somebody goes to hit another player, they get a knee in the side of the helmet, that still can cause a concussion. I think that there's value in trying to reduce the amount of intentional head hits. I think there's value there. Whether or not that actually reduces an overall reduction in concussion, I think still remains to be seen.
Do you have an opinion on it? And I don't mean to put you on the spot. We didn't talk about this, but do you have an opinion on what is the best way to limit concussions in the NFL and college? Is it an equipment issue? Is it the strike zone, or are they doing the best they can?
It's really, really hard to say, because you could say, well, it's an equipment issue. And I've heard some people make that argument that the fact that they have this big protective helmet turns them into a bit of a battering ram, and they're more likely to maybe lead with their, they can lead with their head and not really have the fear that they're going to get hurt. Whereas, well, if we remove the helmet, they may not, may be more protective of their own head. So the people will point to a sport like rugby. Rugby has more concussions than football does. Now, is that just because the nature of the sport is different. You're going into scrums and you're doing things like that. And so it's not necessarily an equipment issue, but the nature of the sport. I think it's really tough to say. People will also point to, old school kind of leatherhead football and say, well, we didn't have this concussion problem. Well, we probably did, but we just didn't care about it. Johnny got a concussion. We'd be like, get back out there, right? Like, just go. Like, we didn't really realize what the ramifications were. And so it's a really tough call. I think that they're trying to do the best they can in terms of, limiting that. I think that there's, they're trying to evolve helmet technologies, but the problem is, and the problem always remains, that no matter what you do, like, for example, one of the top high school sports for concussions is girls soccer. It's a non-contact sport, right? And people will say, yeah, but they're heading the ball. And if you actually look at the data, only 6% of concussions in soccer come from heading the ball. 78% come from player-to-player contact. If you you can do whatever you want from a, rule perspective, but ultimately if you get, 20 people on a field chasing after the same ball, they're going to run into each other, whether there's contact or no contact or helmets or no helmets. And ultimately concussions are going to happen. So the big thing for me has always been not necessarily putting my focus into how do we eliminate concussions or how do we, reduce them down to zero levels. It's how do we take the concussions that have happened and make sure that we're doing the right things so that when the athlete comes back, their brain is recovered. And so that if they do get another concussion, it's just another concussion. And we're not creating this cumulative spiral effect where we're creating long-term problems. So I think from a, like a trying to reduce concussion standpoint, they're probably doing the best they can, because I think they're fighting a losing battle. Like, I just don't think you can. But it's the thing that where I think they're missing the boat is the fact that we're not letting athletes recover. And the problem is because you have a short season, they play once a week. And so if you lose a player for, 4 to 6 weeks, every time a concussion happens, like, imagine if every player was doing that 4 to 6 weeks out, you'd have no teams left by, ready to play, because you'd be fielding everybody. You'd be like, every single player would be out, on a concussion protocol. So you just wouldn't have you. So I think they're up against that challenge of, player safety versus, the business model and the season.
I want to talk about one of your earlier points before we wrap this up. And that's, you were talking about how kids, this is a situation where they're being asked, how do you feel? Can you come back? I mean, I don't know what exactly goes into that, but basically it's up to them to tell people how they feel. And unfortunately, especially in football, there's this stigma, you hear that, rub some dirt on it, right? And so it's like almost those two thoughts are battling each other. And in a lot of players, this is a male-driven thing. It's almost like you're going to say that I'm weak by admitting to some of these symptoms that you're having. And so I think a lot of this can be at least helped by eliminating that stigma. It's okay to say that you're not okay. Mm-hmm. That's something, in a field that I've been in the past, the counseling field. That's a huge issue with males. They don't want to talk about their feelings or things like that, and women too that have become kind of trauma. But so it's to me anyway, that's at least one thing that can be maybe some headway be made in that department.
Yeah, you're talking about something which they refer to it as a culture of sport issue. So what we've tried to do is improve education. Well, if we could just teach the coaches what to look for, if we could just tell the players that, like, if you feel these symptoms, you should tell somebody that it's a concussion. But what you could teach them all you want. And the research really shows this, is that education by itself does not improve the intention to report. It does not improve reporting behavior. It doesn't do anything to actually improve this. So really what you're dealing with is a culture of sport issue. And so a lot of that stems from changing the stigma, which is a difficult thing to do, because you have a coach that, maybe played hard-nosed football when they were younger, and now they're there and they're encouraging, like, suck it up, buttercup, let's go. And then you have also the other players on the team, which may be the same thing. And, like, everyone receives praise for, Johnny broke his hand but finished the game, and these types of things. So there's this kind of unspoken reality that you play through injury. And so it really makes it difficult for a player on this one injury, we say, no, wait, for this one, you don't. and it's hard to get that concept through. So I think there's a lot that has to happen, and I think the conversation is gradually evolving, which is good. But you know, I think that's the challenge, is the culture of sport. How do we change that?
I feel I've gotten several lessons worth of education just from talking to you today. The culture of sport thing blew my mind, because it really is. How can you, you know, football is a tough man's game, and it never won't be.
And I think that the reality of the situation and kind of the paradox is that, you know,
It's a paradox.
when it comes to concussion, if you actually report it, you can get back sooner. And again, like, so we've seen studies where if athletes continue to play in the same game with their concussion, what it does, I was talking about these energy levels, right? What it does is it increases your body temperature. And if you increase your body temperature after having a concussion, it actually, it increases the amount of release of the chemicals that affect your energy production. And so what we see is that if players play for an extra 15 minutes after receiving a concussion, their recovery time goes up by several weeks. And if they continue to play for half an hour or an hour after getting a concussion, it goes up even longer, because you're releasing this chemical called glutamate as your body temperature elevates. And that is what actually leads to the mitochondrial issue. And so the paradox is that by not reporting your injury initially, and even to the coach who says, get back in there, by forcing that athlete to play or encouraging them to play and encouraging your team not to report, you're actually ending up with more long-term symptom issues from that one concussion. Whereas if you were to encourage that reporting, and if the teammates were to encourage that reporting, you could potentially get that player back sooner and have them ready and healthy for the next part of the season. So it is a paradox in this particular injury, that by playing through this injury, you make it much, much, much worse. And not even from just the risk of getting another concussion. It's the body temperature elevation that comes from working and sweating and all that stuff. Generally, the protocol now is get a player who's had a concussion, get them off the field, get their gear off, get them in the shade, and try to cool their body temperature down as much as possible, because that can potentially improve recovery and speed recovery times, because it reduces the amount of that chemical released, right? So there's a whole bunch of things here that come from not reporting that actually make this worse. And so if we can educate people on that and like spread that kind of that idea that like the paradox is by not reporting, you actually are going to be not able to play for longer. Like you're actually being worse on your team. Like it's not heroic. It's actually stupid because now you're going to miss the whole playoffs, right? Like you would have missed a game and now you're going to miss 5, you know, like you just screwed everything up. And so maybe that's something. I don't know.
Dr. Cameron Marshall, wonderful, wonderful guest. Really learned a lot. I think the viewers will have too. Real quick, tell us where everybody can find you, whether it be social media, your YouTube channel that's starting to become incredibly successful, doing an awesome job with that stuff.
Yeah, thanks. Social media, I mostly hang out on Instagram. My handle is @concussion_doc. And I also have a company of concussion clinics. We deal a lot with sports. We work a lot with athletes all over the place. We have about 450 clinic locations worldwide. That's called CompleteConcussions.com. So if you want to find, you know, if you're working for amateur sport and you want to see if there's a clinic in your area that does this protocol stuff well, then go to CompleteConcussions.com. YouTube, it's the Complete Concussion Management YouTube channel. And so we do all sorts of concussion related stuff. There's all sorts of information on there, just respect to concussion and some of the stuff I'm talking about here, with a little bit more, you know, slides and stuff that you can actually see, you know, some of these studies I'm talking about. So you can check that out too, if you're interested.
Awesome job. My name is Mountaineer Paul. You'll be able to see this on 2 different channels. It'll be on Mountaineer Paul Talks Football. It'll also be on the Mark Rogers Show, the voice of college football. Whichever one you see this on, please like, please subscribe, and please go give Dr. Cameron Marshall and Complete Concussion Management. Look them up, man. They do some awesome stuff over there. I'm excited to see, hopefully, doesn't have to be about a specific player, but excited to see what he puts out next. And you have been here with Mountaineer Paul and Dr. Cameron Marshall. We thank you guys. West Virginia plays Baylor tonight. Let's hope West Virginia walks out of Mountaineer Field with a victory.